Hello and welcome back to the channel and a new design contest, and in this one we're looking at Dream Team. And so I wanted to, before we do anything else, I've started doing playthroughs. Those are live on Twitch, but they'll be coming to YouTube in the next couple of days. Probably drop one a day for foreseeable as they come out. But yeah, before I did that, I wanted to walk through what the contest is, what the rules and regulations are and things like that, and what you're kind of expecting and what you're seeing, because for this contest it's far more than just people building courses. So first of all, we changed the format significantly for this year. So there are 6 teams and each team has a captain. So I'm one of those. Captains are myself, Matty from Canada, Pithy Dr. G, Ryan McConnell, BS Petty and Scottish. So all kind of really good designers. And each of us created a plot. So now per team we're then going to have 6 designers, one of whom is a console designer. Now those plots, so each captain designed one plot, and I'm going to show you each of those along with the briefs and restrictions. And basically it became a kind of majority PC contest because most designers are on PC. That means we can share the files, so I can create a plot and send it to other people saying build a course on this with certain restrictions. And we felt that made it a lot more realistic as to how those courses might be generated and the sorts of considerations you bear in mind. What will then happen, so the console designers, however, they had a separate brief, which was basically they had 1000 by 1000, so quite a tight plot, although enough space from which to work. They couldn't do elevation change over 50 feet across the whole plot, so it had to be relatively flat, enough elevation to work with. 3 par 4s under 400 yards, which we'd hope people would be doing anyway, but we like short par 4s. And there's no water on the plot whatsoever. So they had to work to that brief and come up with something on their own. So that's more of a standard one. So my team will never build on the plot that I design. So I have 6 designers on my team, one of whom is the console, and we take the 5 plots from all of the other captains, other than me, assign them between ourselves, and one person on each team completes the brief, which therefore means that at the end of the day, per course file, there'll be 5 plots on it. And then at the end, the captain who designed that plot judge whichever team fulfilled their brief. And therefore I will never judge my own team, etc, etc, etc. So as for captains, you had me, so Pithy Dr. G, so this was his major winning course. Ryan McConnell, his major entry. Matty from Canada, who hasn't published one in a while, but this was his from a while back. Scottish, that was Chapel something else. At BS Petty 24 was our final captain. So what we then did was put the designers into tiers. So tier 1, we then spun a wheel for 1 person per team. 2, again, 1 person per team. And then tier 3, 2 people per team from that one. And then 2 people per team. Now, each team had to have a console designer. That's why those guys are in gold. Once you drew 1 console designer, you couldn't draw another. And after doing the draft, these were the teams that we came up with. And I won't go through all of them, but we think they're pretty balanced, which is what we were after. Now, those teams all set up separate Discords, and we can give advice the whole way through. We can share the files. We can't do anything on the files, so I can't sculpt and send it back for someone like Matt to use. But I can draw measure tools, and I can show him how to do certain things. We think that should mean that we kind of really get some great courses out of this that are truly collaborative and act on feedback. So what I wanted to do next, so these are the people you're expecting courses from, and there's all sorts of game playing you can do and trying to work out who's on which plot and who's going up against whom, etc. What I wanted to do today was really just to show you through those plot files, give you a quick fly around, and so you can see when you're seeing a course, this is what they were working to. So first up, I wanted to look at Ryan McConnell's plot, who built one of the wilder plots. Now you can see the boundaries of the plot are by measure tool. This one is great fun, and you fly around and you've got all sorts of interesting elevation change. You've got a creek, which works all the way through. So there's tons of really cool green sites, really nice land movement up and around. loads of different ways you could go with this. It depends on how head-on you want to tackle some of the elevation change or not, how close to the river you want to get. Do you want to make that the focal point? Do you want to go more land movement? If you do go the land movement, do you want to go really high up or elsewhere? There's loads you can do with this plot. Now, he had some restrictions. Firstly, the clubhouse must be accessed by one of the 3 access roads, so either here or up, access points. So from here, over here, or over here. Couldn't go outside of those areas. Neither of those particularly restrictive. Those would be fine. The one that's a challenge is you can't plant any new trees, really. You can plant some highlight trees, but you've got to keep the ones that are already there. If you delete them, you can't add any new ones, basically. The second one is from each green, you had to have a maximum, you had to walk 30 yards to the next tee. And so the routing has to be pretty careful to consider that. But 3 times per round, you could go 60 yards. You could avoid doing this entirely, but you'd have to put a cart path over the whole thing. So you'd have to put cart paths around everywhere. And that was this plot and its restrictions. So this one, really interesting, one of the most fun ones in terms of land movement. There's a lot of big, bold stuff, but the planting restriction is a really interesting one and one that is certainly a challenge. Second plot to look at, apologies for lack of transitions, it's just difficult, is BS Petties. Now this one, again, one of the wilder with land movements and just a dramatic plot. You have this kind of lake over here that's overlooked by some bluffs, and full disclosure, this was the one that I ended up taking for my plot. Mine's already been released, so I don't mind saying that at this stage. And therefore I can talk about this plot in quite a lot of depth. So this one, you had to have a clubhouse by the access road, and he wanted kind of a resort feel, so upscale clubhouse with some amenities, things for guests to do, etc. Then you've got these mulch areas. Now you had to have 5 holes within those. You could put 5 holes in one. You could put 1 hole in all 5. Or you could kind of do a mixture of both. You didn't have to visit all of them. If you went up here, there's this Native American burial ground that he's put in, and that cannot be moved. But if you went in this area, he wanted that featured prominently in one of the holes, rather than just being passed by and ignored a little bit. You also had to have a signature par 3 facing this Howling Wolf rock, which looks sort of like a wolf from certain angles. So somewhere on the course, signature par 3 facing that one. And then the final one, I guess, was pretty consistent across all plots. There's no major land movement, so like go and find the holes that are there. Don't just take a giant flatten brush and flatten all of this and make the course that you would always visit. Or you'd always make, like, use the land, what it suggests to you. But there was some wilder parts of this. So you had a lake that you could go around, or kind of Route 2 right at the foot of the rocks. There's some really bold land movement up here that I'll be interested to see whether people take on, because I guess you could be going over here and down, and there's all sorts you could be looking at from here. Then you've got some of these areas, so the cliffside area. And one thing that was tricky was routing between these ravines, because if you look at the lengths, you can't really put a par 4 in there without it being awkward. So you kind of had to play some diagonals with it a little bit. You couldn't go directly along, which was interesting. And then also there's some kind of, it looks flatter until you get down on the land, and then you realise some of these ridges are really flipping big. And so it's, do you route between them, do you route over them, etc. But yeah, this one was a ton of fun to build on as well. I think that's all of the restrictions, but yeah, certainly an entertaining one to build on. So when you see this plot, this is where we started. Next up, we have Scottishes, and from kind of 2 of the wilder plots to one that's kind of wild but a very different vibe. We wanted to make sure we had a good coverage of different types of course, and so it was great that Scottish wanted to build a Parkland kind of Golden Age style course, or plot rather. So there's some rolling land here. that can be really, really awkward. Now, his was very much limited sculpting. Assume that you are a Golden Age designer and you can't just, you don't have the manpower or like much beyond horse and cart to really cut down loads. There's certainly no big machinery. Therefore, you have to work your way around some of those features interestingly. Now, the plot itself was quite tight, so separates a big access road. You could not hit golf balls over this, but you could move the bridge or access point wherever you wanted. There has to be this little village down here. You have a city backdrop that you could use, or you could delete things from if you needed to manage the memory, but ideally that should be in there somewhere. There was also this little creek working its way through, which could be slightly rerouted, so people may not know, but Golden Age designers like Donald Ross would reroute creeks to suit their whole designs and just kind of dig a new trench and fill this one in. But yeah, it wouldn't be a case of just, oh, I want the whole thing to go here. It would be little minor alterations. You can see the plot boundaries as to where you could work from, but some of this land movement was really abrupt, and so there's some very interesting golf to be found on here. But of all the plots that we worked through, this was probably the most challenging for our money to route, just because you ended up with some blindness and some awkward holes no matter what you did, and we didn't want to flatten it too much. So it's a really interesting plot. There's loads of fun, and this side got almost even more abrupt with some of the land, but there's loads of cool stuff to work off. And I think that was it for the restrictions mainly. There was nothing saying you had to visit both sides of the plot, nothing about where your clubhouse had to be. It was just the land movement, the kind of plot size were the two major ones. Right. Fourth, and you have my one. So this was another one with a sculpting limitation, and whilst they sound like they're hard limitations, what we didn't really want was people just designing the easiest course or the first thing that came to mind. Like, the whole point of this contest is, here's your land, try to move it as little as possible and find unique golf holes that are there, because when you start doing that you get better courses generally. Now mine was basically, I didn't want you doing much with like flatten, so therefore I limited flatten to fuzzy brush like that width, which is why that measure tool is there, because the land movement is enough for you to be able to find a golf course pretty much out there. Also wanted to say that no raises above 5 feet generally. If it's going to 10, then you're probably moving a bit too much land other than just managing sight lines. So essentially that sounds quite restrictive, but I just wanted to make it so that people don't move too much and search for like alternative solutions, because I find those present more interesting ones. As you can see, mine was kind of based on a heathland. The heather can all be moved. It's purely just to give you some idea of visuals and how you might do this. The other one with mine was clubhouse had to stay here, and these external tree lines, you could bring them in. They weren't the worry, but any of these internal trees, these all had to stay, although you could delete any 10 that you chose. So there was some cool, and there were some cool green sites hidden around these, where you could kind of make a decision to lose some trees if you wanted to access those. But I was happy with all sorts of replanting or whatever you did, and essentially just gave you a lot of corridors and hoped that people could find some interesting golf holes. But yeah, flying you round, there's no water or anything on this course other than just heather, some rolling hills, mounds, things like that. You've got flatter portions and you've got wilder portions. You've got the areas where the trees are, and those kind of little corridors. But yeah, you could delete some, just not loads, in order to widen the corridors. And you could plant as many more as you might have wanted. So that was basically this one. With mine, you can change the lighting, and then the area around the clubhouse is all just a little bit more sedate and flatter. So you can see this land is not really doing too much. And I think I said you had to keep that access road as well. So that's this course on this plot file. Right, number 5, penultimate one, and this was Matty's. So Matty filled in and was going to do the last one we needed, and we thought a links would be good. So he came up with this one, and this is kind of based on Irish links and things. First of all, you had an estuary and you couldn't go over to this side of it, so this is purely backdrop. So it's up to you how you fill that out. There had to be a village in this area, not necessarily throughout the whole thing, I don't think. There had to be one there. You then had castle ruins over here. You couldn't build golf holes beyond this line, so he didn't want you putting a, like, this is just to save you from yourself, really. Like, let's not put a par 3 here, for example. That would be dumb, but you could put one with that in the backdrop and that would look very cool. The one that's probably the most challenging is in this mulched area with the dunes. I think you could only have 5 green sites. So it was about how did you maximize that and work your way into this area. And the reason that's there is because, A, this is the most dramatic land, but I think he wanted you to use that sparingly. Whereabouts in the round did you put that? Beginning, middle, or end? And also ensure that you could build good holes on like softer land as well. So I think there's the kind of anyone can find dramatic holes on here. But as with lots of these plots, it's like there's an opportunity for a really good designer to show their skill on flatter land that does like less interesting or dramatic things. And there's a lot of cool stuff here. So you can get big views of those ruins. You could be working down. There's loads of land movement. You've got a beach. So even though you've got just this dune area here, you've got plenty of dune front down here as well. And then it's how you're using that more sedate land movement. Oh, and the final thing was you had to start near the village, I think. So, but that didn't define where you went. You could have gone out this side. You could start from here as well. So a few constraints, but nothing too crazy with this one. And there's some really cool land movement in and around that you can profit from. So this one, like, not a strict routing challenge, but like I think it offers a lot of variety, and we'll see plenty of different approaches to this one. And saving probably the hardest to explain until last, we have Petties plot, which isn't that hard to understand. It's just got some slightly more unique restrictions. So this one features, it's probably easier to show you around first and then explain. So it's got some really cool ravines with a little river going through it, and some planting, all of which the planting you could move. The creek you couldn't. I think that has to stay exactly the same. And some awesome land movement going down into these little ravines and working through them. Then some flatter land on top as well, sometimes more rumpled. There's just a really good variety on this course. However, like when you dig into it, actually I'd say really awkward to route on. In a good way, like I've done a routing on this and really liked it and enjoyed the process, but it's very challenging. You also have oceanfront over here that you could be looking to use as well, and you have defined plot area. Now, where this one got a little bit more challenging was kind of Dan basically said you could buy and sell land. Imagine everything in this portion counts as 1, everything in this portion counts as 2, and everything up here counts as a half, basically. I can buy and sell in here for 1, so I could bring in 10 yards, 50 yards, whatever. Let's call it 100 yards here. If I brought in, well, then I can only buy an extra 50 down below this line, basically. Or I could buy 200 up here. And that's essentially how this one worked. Now, I think you don't really need to do much. He's given you a load of space. It's more really if you wanted extra space for tees or greens. But I think you could possibly buy some cool stuff down here. Or you could generate yourself a little bit more oceanfront if you wanted to go that way. The land nearer the ocean, there is some cool stuff down here, and like low-lying ripples that you could work off. But the land by the ocean's pretty sedate. He said you can alter the cliffside a little bit, but nothing major, so no sculpts over 10 feet again. And the same general principle of go and find golf holes as they exist in nature. Otherwise, you couldn't hit shots over roads. So I think if you chose to go out this way, you couldn't then make a road hole this way. And the access road had to be kept here. And I think that might have been about it. Oh, no, there was one more. It was a similar one about restrictions between greens and tees. So if I put down a green here, say, the closest green edge to the next tee had to be within 50 yards. But 3 times per round, it could be that 100. So similar to McConnell's, in that there was space to move it just a little bit more. But the idea being make a course that is walkable. So yes, so those are all of our Dream Team plots, and you will be seeing courses coming out on each of them. So every single plot will have 5 courses come out, and what will be the most fun is seeing how people interpreted each plot differently and which holes they found, because whilst you might find one similar par 3, say everyone looks at putting one down here, for example, which would be a good place for a hole. How you work away from that and the overall 18-hole puzzle is always going to change, and therefore you're going to get different kind of approaches. And it's very much how you would get real life of different architects pitching on different plots. Like, what would you do here? What would you do here? So it's more about that decision-making process than anything else, because we know people can create a good course, but also having that ability to take a pre-made plot that's got a lot of depth and nuance to it, because we find that kind of a lot of people will rush into building plots, so we wanted to give them ones that had a ton of time taken into making them and have a lot of interest, but also still feel natural. So there's nothing contrived really on here. But yeah, giving people those plots plus the opportunity for lots of feedback from teammates, and you should be able to find something really, really interesting. They've had from the start of December through till the end of March, so courses coming out thick and fast. But yeah, you can see how you could quickly find golf holes on here just idly, and you browse around. It's very easy to find some golf holes. It is very difficult to find a really good full 18 holes where you're not compromising, and that's where those constraints come in. And then each captain will decide who fulfilled it the best. So yeah, look forward to those playthroughs coming out soon. Hopefully that gives you a bit of insight into the plots and what people were working with and why we chose to do it this way. And yeah, it'll be a fun contest. See you soon.